Turn it on, you got it on.
And I rode a horse, and I helped put up hay, and I rode a horse to school, and well, some of the time. Sometimes I walked on snow.
Where'd you grow up at? You grew up on the farm down?
Yeah, down Grandpa Baughman's. It was in Putnam County, Missouri.
Yeah.
And oh.
How far away did you live from school? Everybody always tells me about how
Well,
they had to walk 40 miles to school.
I lived about 2 miles from school. And sometimes we walked, and sometimes Dad took us, and sometimes when it was snowy and bad, he'd take us in the sled. But and then after my sister she got through school, I had to go by myself, so I rode a pony and put in my brother's barn. So I went to Wells School.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had 4 sisters and 5 brothers. But you see, one brother was dead before I was born. And then I remember when one of them died. He was 24 years old.
How old were you?
Oh, I was about 12. Then 10 probably.
That must have been terrible.
Well, he lived in St. Joe, Missouri, and he had smallpox, and he worked in a clothing store. He never did like the farm, and so after he worked in this clothing store, he went back to work too soon, and that smallpox settled on his lungs. So he come home, and my folks got a doctor to take him and put him in a sanitarium in Colorado Springs.
Colorado Springs, Colorado?
Colorado.
He went out there by train, I suppose.
Yeah, he went out by train. Dr. Sturman took him.
Huh.
And he got him in a Nobile Lodge, is the name of it. And he died there. My mother went out. And he just wound up with tuberculosis, that's what it was. And he didn't have any money to go on, so he come home and the folks sent him.
What were all your brothers and sisters' names?
Well, I had, my oldest sister's name was Maud, and she married a Houston. She lived at Omaha, Missouri. And then my other sister lived in Bird City, Kansas. Blanche was her name. And Myrtle, she lived in Tumway. And of course Lily, she lived here in Centerville. And I was the youngest.
You and Lily were always the closest.
Oh yes, she was 3 years older than me. And
was that because you married because you married brothers, or were you always that way?
The other children was older than us, you see, and we was only 2 at home. They all married and left, and we was only 2 at home. And there was a guy here. Well, his wife. Well, when I was in the hospital and had surgery, his wife was in the room with me. And of course, he's that Zell Musgrove. He was but they lived a half a mile from us. And my sister Lily him and her was about the same age, and he's still living. He's 97, over at the other home. And he said to me, he said, "Do you remember when we used to play together?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And we'd go over there, and we'd have church. And of course, I was 3 years younger than them. And we'd have church, and he was a preacher, and my sister sang. And I said, "Well, let's stop and think. If you hadn't had me, you wouldn't have had any audience." So I sat back on a board, and and he his folks got him a BB gun, and he killed a sparrow, and we had a funeral. Went in, asked his mother for a matchbox, and we buried that and had a funeral. He preached the sermon, and Lily sang, and I was the audience.
The mourner, huh?
Yeah, that was a mourner. Oh, I can't think of, we used to, and back then, why, we had, for entertainment, we made taffy, and we'd go to each other's houses, and we'd pop corn, and the folks made sorghum, and they raised cane, and they had a sorghum mill.
Was that where they got most of their money? Was the sorghum, or
Well, no.
they raised corn probably and
Raised corn,
sold hogs?
cattle and hogs. Cattle and hogs, they raised quite a lot of cattle and hogs. Worked hard. Raised a big family. But my folks, when they got married, they moved on that place. And it was in a log house. And then when my sister lived in Kansas, she was, Blanche was her name. When she's a baby, they built a new house out on the road and moved out there. So when they went to housekeeping, when they got married, they moved on this farm, and they never did move off of it.
Exactly where was it anyway?
Well, it's, don't you know where Grandpa Baughman's farm was?
Well, I think I knew at one time, but
Well, it was, I can't hardly tell you. It's, you know where Chariton, Missouri is.
yeah.
Well, Chariton's, that was about 2 miles west. And then off of the highway, why, it was just half a mile off the highway that goes down towards Omaha.
Oh.
So,
Yeah. Did you know your grandparents?
no, they's dead before I was born.
What with your mom's mom and your dad's
Well,
mom and
my
everybody?
mother's mother lived with us. Grandma Wagner was her name. And she lived with us, and she died at our place.
Oh.
So, she lived upstairs. She liked to be upstairs. She had a room up there. And so my mother, they put a heating stove up there, and she moved her sewing machine up. And she'd sew and sat up there. Well, there's 2 rooms, and my grandma was in kind of a small room, but she wouldn't, they had a bed downstairs, but she wouldn't stay down there. She wanted to be upstairs. She died up there too. And so my mother took her sewing machine, went up there, and we fixed her trays, and well, not my mother, but her mother, Grandma Wagner. And you know, when we was kids growing up, Grandma, she'd get a little mad, she's gonna run off, you know. And my mother would tell us to watch her. And we'd watch her, and she'd go down the edge of the orchard there, and she'd come back. Oh, we used to go out, me and Lily, and take our lunch, and my mother raised turkeys. She raised everything for us that concerned. She had geese and a lot of chickens. Guineas. Bet you don't know what a guinea is, do you?
I kind of know, but why would anybody raise guineas? You don't,
Well, they claim when the chicken hawks come along, why, they scared the chicken hawks away.
Oh.
They squall, they would. And you know, the guineas, they make their nest out. They make their nest out along the road, but you couldn't put your hand. If you put your hand in that, they'd leave it. So my mother just let them hatch, sit there and they hatch and have their little guineas.
So you never eat the eggs?
No. She raised geese, picked feathers and made feather beds, and
Your grandma, how old was she when she died?
Oh, she was in her 80s. Now she's buried over in the Friendship. That's over west of where Grandpa Baughman's place was, over Friendship Cemetery. And one time when Lily come before she passed away, why Max took me and Lloyd. We thought we'd go over there, and we just figured that cemetery would just be not taken care of, you know. I remember when she died, I remember being there, and we went over there, and that was the most well-kept cemetery you ever seen. They had an iron fence around it and steps and a white iron gate to it. I could go right to her. She had a nice monument. Wagner was her name.
Was there a church there?
No.
Where you went to church at Mount Herman, I
Mount
suppose.
Herman. We went to church at Mount Herman. That's where Grandpa and Grandma was buried. And Uncle Will and Uncle Charles and Jenny and Jewel's little girl and Uncle Charles' wife, Laura. She's buried there. And Lily and Orville and, well, Aunt Myrtle's buried there too. So, there's quite a few of them. They're at the Sheraton. It's in that cemetery behind that church.
And did you go to high school at...
No, I just went through 8th grade and then got married.
Oh, you got married pretty young.
Yeah, I did. I fell in love.
Lily married... Orville was younger than Irma.
Oh, yeah.
And Lily, the older sister, married the younger man.
Yeah.
And the older sister married the younger man, and the younger sister married the older man.
Yeah, that's the way it went.
Didn't plan it, I don't suppose.
No, we didn't plan it.
How'd you meet Granddad?
Huh?
How did you meet Granddad?
Well, they had down to the country school where we went to school. Why, they had a candy supper down there one night, and he was there, and my niece was with me, and him and another fella took me and her home. Well, Brian Hudson's who it was, and they took us home from there. After then, it was a whirlwind courtship.
What's a candy supper?
Huh?
I can't remember what a candy supper
Well, they
is.
sold sometimes they called them pie suppers. Some people would take pies and they'd have an auctioneer
And it was to raise money for the school.
for the school, and then they'd have and then some people would take boxes of candy. Now, if you took a pie, and whoever bought your pie, you eat that with it.
Oh.
So most generally, if you had a boyfriend, you'd tell him who you're there. When I had a pie there, why, some of the boys running up on Granddad. You know, that's what they do if they found out that he was bidden. So they run it up on him. But he got it. I don't expect he had too much money either.
Yeah, that was before the Depression, wasn't it? That was,
Oh yes, that's long. We was married when the Depression. When our girls was going to school in the Depression, they went through that. They was all in high school. But I said none of them girls ever did cause me any trouble at all, or either of us. They growed up on the farm, and as they said, they learned to swim in the creek. And their dad, they said that sometimes he'd be out plowing corn, he'd tie his team up and come over there and sit on the bank while they was swimming in that creek.
Well, I never really understood that. That creek was never deep enough to swim
Well,
in, was it?
when it'd get up, there'd be holes in it.
Oh.
See, you asked him.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you
Well, that's
guys-
okay.
Well, I'm sorry. I got you right in the middle of something. I didn't know you had anyone in here. I was just wanting to remind you guys that at 2 o'clock, the kids will be here for an Easter candy hunt, and wondered if you wanted to come out on the patio and watch them.
Well, I'll see.
Okay.
He's videotaping me now.
Okay. I'll see you later. I'm sorry I disturbed you.
That's all right, Barb.
So they learned to swim in whatever holes there were.
Yeah,
behind that.
you know, that creek never got up, but when it'd get up, it'd make holes out. And some of them holes had quicksand in them too. And one day why, Granddad had 2 tractors. Of course, I drove one of them. And so he took the older tractor down in the creek to wash it. And well, that quicksand would move in that creek, you know. He didn't think there's any there, and he got in that quicksand. So he had the other tractor, and he come running up the house, and he says, "Come on down there and help me." He said, "That tractor's settling in that quicksand." And so he had a big cable. Well, he had a chain, I think, what we had. And he hooked the other tractor on it, so he put, oh, Esther said, "I hope Dad didn't get on that one in the quicksand." I said, "No, he put me on it." And he got on the other one, and we couldn't pull it out. So he had to get on that other one and make a flying trip while I was sitting there on that darn thing. And said he went up and got Nathan Adams, and he had a big cable. And he put he had a big tractor, and he put his tractor on it, pulled it out. But I was the one on it that was on the quicksand.
You agreed to do that.
Yeah, I agreed to do it.
Yeah.
Well, he had me on it. See, I started it. See, what he was doing, I started it. I think maybe what he put me on there for. I started it, and he thought it'd pull itself, help pull it out, but when you started, it just went down deeper. And he didn't want that up in the valves and things, you know. So Nathan come down and pulled it out, and we got out.
Yeah. I guess it'd have been a mess if it had sunk under. It would have been. I don't know whether they'd ever gotten it out or not.
No. It just kept sinking. But he said he didn't know there's quicksand there. See, the creek had been up and it worst moved. There was quicksand over there by that spring too, at times.
That was where you drilled your well to get the water.
Yeah.
When you put water in the house.
Put water in the house. Yeah. But we didn't get to see that was in. But then we dug out 600 feet from the. We didn't get that up there. You see, they couldn't. Them guys give it up because they'd had to went under the creek with the pipes. And so they gave that up, and then we had to wait about 3 years, and we got the guys from Promise City to come and dig a well. It was 600 feet from east of the barn. And they started to dig in that, and they got down 30 foot, and the water was coming in so hard that they had to wall it. They thought they hit that spring. They said that underground spring. We had awful good water down there. We had water.
What was wrong with the water that was up on top of the hill? I remember there was a well.
Oh, that was hard as a rock.
Oh.
But we just had a cistern. That was hard. It wasn't good anyway. And I ain't going to put on this video what one of our friends said he'd do with that water if he had. So.
Well, were you much affected by the Depression?
Oh yes, we had an awful hard time. You know, we owed on our farm, and we worked day and night. We're near it. Kids is in school.
Who'd you buy the farm from, anyway?
Bought it from a woman, Ada Biddison. Her man and her had separated, and she got the farm. And then we had the barn to burn, you know. We had an awful nice big barn there. And there's an old barn set right south of it. And Granddad had thrashed and threw straw in that. The kids played in it, but they claimed that was combustion. Combustion is that what they
spontaneous combustion. From some wet hay or
so
something.
we had company that night, and we sat in the kitchen talking. It was, oh, you know them, Terry. They lived down there by Cecil and Clarence Basco's it was. And we sat in the kitchen and they were talking, and there's a light. Oh, we heard the office roar. And I said, oh, that's a car coming up the hill. And I turned around and looked out that door window, that south window down there, and I jumped about the middle of the floor. I said, "Oh, that barn's afar." And we went out there, and the good barn wasn't afar yet, but the other barn was just licking that. We didn't have very much insurance either, and so we had some pretty rough times.
That must have been built south of the chicken house then. That wasn't where when I was growing up, you had a really big, beautiful white barn that was east of the house, but that barn must have been south of the house.
No, it wasn't south of the house. It's right there where that other barn was.
Oh.
And so we built a new barn, and of course this woman that had the mortgage on the place, she took part of the insurance. And but people were so good. Back then, they'd say, "Oh, we know." Well, some of them, Granddad had combined for them, and they didn't have money. People just didn't have money. And some of them owed him trash bills. And they'd say, "Well, Irma, if you want us to, we'll just come and work our bill out." And he said, "That'd just be fine." And the day we put the roof on that barn, and it was in November, it was getting, they 13 men there for dinner that day. They just come, just all directions, and come with their hammers and put the roof on it. We got it enclosed and had a storm about the next day. Because that was in November, and our cows had never been milked out of that barn. And we had the awfulest time of milking them cows that ever was. It never been milked out of the stanchions.
Oh, you milked them outside?
Yeah, we
You
tied
had
them.
to keep the milk in them, I guess.
Huh?
If you stopped milking, then they'd all go dry.
Well,
So
no, we had to tie them to a post out there.
Oh.
But see, they'd been used to stanchions. And we had 10 we was milking. And, but people come and worked out their bills. And of course, some of them, but that barn went up awful quick. But it was getting, it was starting winter, We didn't have no barn. So.
Didn't you lose all the hay that year?
Oh, yeah.
What, you had to buy hay to feed the cattle?
Yeah, well, lost everything in the barn. The car was in the barn, but Granddad got it out. And we had it was dry, and there was awfulest crowd there that night. These people come from miles around. They could see that light, And he had a wood pile out there, and the wood pile got afar. And the house was afar. That was blowing, that had so much force to it, a big fire like that. And of course, that house had, they was men up on top of the house with water when one of them shingles from the barn, there's such a force to it. Why, they'd drop on there and start to burning from the barn. There's awfulest crowd there that night. People come for miles around. And now, Eric Klasky lived up the road from us. It was, I expect, he's up there on the Grace Knott place then. It had been 2 miles, and he said that him and his wife was down there that night, and he said that they found burnt pieces of shingle out in his cornfield from that. And he said, you wouldn't hardly believe that with the force of that fire, it went that far.
But there was no way to keep it off the good barn.
No.
Because it was just too hot.
And it had that good barn had 2 driveways in it. And see, we had our car in one, Irma got the car out. But and then he never took care of his machine, he always took care of his machine. But there's a, long on the side there by the barn, why, he had a tool. He had all of his tools hung up in there. Like his hammer and and all that stuff. There was a shelf along there, and pitchforks and shovels and things.
And lost all that stuff.
Yeah, we lost all of it. But he got the harness out, the horses, the barn. He didn't have any horses in there, but he run and got his harness out. But it was a burning then, starting to burn. And but the funny thing about it, Granddad always kind of particular about his, and I'd had the spade out digging potatoes that day, and he always growled at me for not leaving it out. But that day I'd left it out, and he tickled to death. It didn't burn. Because I just left it up there where I dug some potatoes. But his pitchforks and everything burned up. He had a tool bench there. It's called a tool bench, and he had places he hung his tools all up behind it. Like, I don't know, he had his place for his hammers and these saws. All of his saws burned.
Granddad was an awful neat guy, wasn't he?
Yes.
Took good care of his stuff.
Yeah, he took care of his machinery and his car. I said he'd put me outside before he put that car outside. So, no, he took care of everything. He's a neat guy.
Yeah, so what year was that?
Well, let's see, when that barn burned, it was, we moved up there in 29, and it burnt about 30, year of 30. 1930, imagine, 30 or 31.
So that was about the middle of the Depression.
Oh, it was.
I don't see how you ever recovered from that.
Oh, hello. Lena. Oh, aren't you? I think I know.
Well, but we're only up to 1931 here, though.
The barn burning.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the girls were in high school in the 30s then, or what? I can't picture.
Well, let's see now. Dolores, I think, graduated in no, they wasn't in high school then. They was going to Zoar, or going to Boston. I mean, they walked across the field to Boston.
Yeah, that's right. Dolores would have only been about 10 years old.
Yeah, about 10 years old. And then after Dolores and Esther got through country school, why, rather than have June to go across the field, why, Irma got her in the X-line school. So when Esther and Dolores was going to high school in X-line, now I don't know what year that was. Your mother would know when she graduated.
Well, Dolores was born in 20?
No, she wasn't going in the 20s.
No, I mean, was she? What year was she born?
1900.
Dolores was born in 1919.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then so she'd been in high school.
She was pretty. Let's see. She rode the horse at first when she started high school, and then when Esther got through country school, why, Irma, he bought him a pony, he had this pony. It was a spotted old Billy, they called it. And we just feel aggravated now that none of us got a picture of him. And then Irma got him a buggy, and they all three, they drove to X-Line with that pony.
Oh.
And it was a Arabian, wasn't a small pony, it wasn't a big. And then when Esther and June walked across the field after Dolores went to high school, and then but when Esther graduated from the country school, why, she went to town. Why, Irma got in that buggy, and they drove this horse. And
Well, that was a long ride to Exline High School, wasn't it, from your farm?
Good Lord, they've
Jeez,
walked it.
that's...
They've walked it 3 miles.
Is that all? It seemed like more than that.
And so Arnold, he said he'd been and got their horse ready for him. And one morning, Larson never wanted to be late. And he said, well, now you better pound old Billy over the back, because that first bell had rung at school. Then 30 minutes later, the last bell had rang. So Lars said they's going to elope with that horse down the hill. That hill where we lived there. And so they went and elope, and one of the neighbors said he's chucking corn up the road, and they still had that pony in elope. And they got up there, and so the janitor, Lars knowed him, she hollered and told him, said, don't you ring that bell like it on that school ground. And he didn't. So she never was late. They never was late. They drove that pony, and then we had friends there, and they put the pony in the barn. And Granddad, he took hay and grain up there so they could get that when they got up there. So that pony went through. I have to tell you about that. So none of us ever got a picture of him. And so after we needed cattle, so there's a guy who wanted to trade Granddad a cow for that pony. So, but he wouldn't trade till he asked the girls about it. And so we always said Billy went through high school at Pony. So they told him to go ahead and trade the pony. And he did. And that evening after that guy had come and got him, he brought the cow over there and then took the pony. He was a nice guy, though, they told me. That pony got out and he come home. He come in there on a dead run. And the cows cried. They just was sick about it, And but when Lars was riding him to school there at Exline, if she wanted to stay in town, she'd just tie the reins up and he'd come home. He'd just come in there on a dead run. So we feel bad now that we didn't get no picture of him. So.
Yeah, it must have been a good horse.
Stop it.
Yeah, and then Irma got him a cart and they drove it to school. And they kept it in our friend's barn up there. And this guy lived there by him, right by that barn, and he said, I got the biggest kick out of them girls. Said that they'd stop that horse, and Esther would jump out on one side, Larsa would jump out on the other, they'd just leave that horse in the barn, It just unhooked him on both sides,
Yeah.
So they all graduated from the Exline High School. Of course, the high school ain't even there now. They tore it down.
June graduated from Exline too, huh?
But I can't know what years they graduated.
Well, I don't know. I'm sure Mom knows. I don't know.
Oh, sure, they know.
Then
But
Dolores went
I
on.
was thinking now, Dolores was born in 19, and you see, she'd have been, well, let's see. Well, she started to school before she was 5. She went, you see where we lived then, we didn't live where you, down there on the farm. We lived on a farm, we lived across the road from the schoolhouse, down to Evans. And Dolores really started school down there.
At Evans?
Evans.
Oh.
And she started school when she just loved school. She'd go over there and pick up the kids' dinner buckets and things, and take them in the house. And she wasn't quite 5 when she started school. Nellie Hutchison was a teacher's name that she started too.
And then you bought the farm down in
Yeah, we bought that.
Caldwell Township.
Yeah, in Caldwell Township. We moved up there in, when did we move up there? 1929. And we lived there just about a year and that barn burnt.
Yeah, Granddad told me one time he sold a hog for 75 cents during
I don't know. I know hogs went awful cheap, and they was 2 cents, and cattle was, but cattle got cheap too. You know, we went through all that.
Dolores, she went to after she graduated from high school, then she went on to college.
No,
Didn't
she taught out of a. She just taught on our teacher certificate there at the X-Line School.
Oh, that's right. You didn't need to go to college then.
Oh no, not then. You didn't have to go to college if you had a certificate. You graduated high school certificate, you know. Well, when you went through high school.
Yeah.
But then they got so, and that's the reason she quit teaching school. You see, she taught after she's married. And so, but then she taught there at Numa. Well, she taught the Wilson School, and then she taught at Numa, and then she'd have to go to school and renew her certificate, you see. And she didn't want to leave home and renew her certificate, so she just went in and worked in the courthouse for the county superintendent. And then they done away with the county superintendent, and she went upstairs and worked for the recorder. She worked in the courthouse for 14 years.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, she, let me see, Granddad, he raised Angus cattle.
We had black ones.
Yeah. And
We had 10 Guernseys though that we milked, and we raised the black ones, sold the calves.
yeah. And you always had chickens, I remember.
Oh yes, my
You
God, I had chickens.
You always had pullets.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure I ever knew what a pullet was. You just told me those are pullet eggs. I remember
They's little.
picking the pullet eggs. Yeah, they're little chickens or something.
Yes?
Man,
Yes.